You ever notice how the moment you stop taking everything personally, people suddenly become easier to understand? That comment they made wasn't always about you. That distance wasn't always rejection. That change in their attitude wasn't necessarily proof that you did something wrong. Sometimes you were simply standing in the middle of a pattern you were too emotionally involved to see. And that's the trap. When you take everything personally, you stop observing and start reacting. Every silence feels like an insult. Every delay feels intentional. Every change in energy becomes a question you desperately need answered. You spend your mind trying to decode people who were never asking you to decode them. But the moment you step back, something strange happens. You start noticing repetition. The same people who criticize you when you grow. The same ones who disappear when you stop chasing them. The same conversations that always leave you questioning yourself. The same behaviors disguised as accidents, misunderstandings, or coincidence. And suddenly, you realize you weren't surrounded by random events. You were surrounded by patterns. The difference is, you couldn't see them while your emotions were busy defending your ego. You were too focused on asking, "Why did they do this to me?" instead of asking, "What does this behavior reveal?" That question changes everything. Because when you stop making every situation about your worth, you gain something far more valuable than approval, perspective. You begin watching without immediately judging, listening without immediately defending, walking away without needing the final word. And the quieter you become emotionally, the louder the patterns become. There is a strange moment that happens when you finally realize not everything is about you. Not every silence is punishment. Not every cold look is hatred. Not every unanswered message is some carefully designed attack on your existence. Sometimes people are simply busy. Sometimes they are distracted. Sometimes they are fighting battles you know nothing about. And sometimes, yes, people are behaving badly, but even then, their behavior can reveal more about their own character, mood, insecurity, or priorities than it reveals about your value. But when you take everything personally, you hand strangers the remote control to your emotions. One sentence can ruin your entire day. One change in someone's tone can make you question yourself. Someone walks past you without saying hello, and suddenly your mind becomes a courtroom. You start building evidence. What did I do? Did I say something wrong? Are they angry? Did they hear something about me? Did I embarrass myself? And the funniest part is that you rarely have the evidence. You have an interpretation. That's where the trap begins. Your mind hates uncertainty. It wants an explanation immediately, so when information is missing, it creates one. And because you're emotionally involved, the explanation often becomes personal. You don't know why someone became distant, so you assume you caused it. You don't know why someone criticized you, so you assume something is wrong with you. You don't know why someone changed, so you start searching yourself for the mistake. Stop. Look again. People carry their own fears, frustrations, ambitions, insecurities, disappointments, and private problems into every interaction. You can walk into a room having done absolutely nothing wrong and still become the target of someone's bad mood. You can treat someone with respect and still be misunderstood. You can give your best and still be criticized by somebody who has already decided what they think about you. That doesn't automatically make you guilty. And this is where emotional maturity begins. You stop asking, "What does this say about me?" and start asking, "What is actually happening here?" That tiny shift creates distance between reality and your reaction. Maybe their tone changed because they're stressed. Maybe they are pulling away because their priorities changed. Maybe they misunderstood you. Maybe they simply don't like you. Maybe they want something from you. Maybe they're projecting something they haven't dealt with inside themselves. You don't need to immediately choose one explanation. You can observe. That's power. Because when you stop taking everything personally, you stop wasting energy defending yourself against stories that exist only inside your head. You don't need to prove your innocence every time someone misunderstands you. You don't need to chase people for reassurance every time their energy changes. You don't need to turn every uncomfortable interaction into a crisis. You become harder to disturb because you understand something most people learn too late. Another person's opinion is not a measurement of your identity. Let them misunderstand you. Let them have their assumptions. Let them interpret your silence however they want. You don't have to correct every story people create about you. And don't confuse this with becoming careless. Taking nothing personally doesn't mean ignoring disrespect or pretending harmful behavior doesn't matter. It means you stop automatically attaching every external event to your self-worth. You can recognize disrespect without thinking you are worthless. You can accept rejection without believing you are undesirable. You can hear criticism without collapsing into shame. You can simply look at the situation and say, "Interesting," then watch. Because once you stop emotionally jumping at every little movement, people start revealing patterns. You notice who only respects you when you agree with them. You notice who becomes uncomfortable when you establish boundaries. You notice who disappears when you stop giving them constant attention. You notice who supports your growth and who only liked the version of you that was easier to control. One moment can fool you. One conversation can confuse you. One strange look can make you suspicious. One cold response can make you wonder whether something changed. But a pattern is different. A pattern doesn't need to scream. It simply repeats itself until you finally become quiet enough to notice. This is where most people make the mistake. They judge everything separately. They look at one argument and call it a misunderstanding. They look at one broken promise and call it an accident. They look at one disrespectful comment and tell themselves the person was probably having a bad day. And maybe they were. But then it happens again and again. And somehow you keep treating every event like it exists in isolation because accepting the pattern would force you to accept something uncomfortable about the relationship, the environment, or the person standing in front of you. You don't want to believe it, so you explain it away. You give people unlimited chances while giving yourself unlimited reasons to doubt what you already noticed. That's how patterns stay invisible. Not because they're hidden, but because your emotions keep negotiating with the evidence. You see someone constantly disrespecting your boundaries, but you focus on the one time they apologized. You notice someone only contacts you when they need something, but you remember the one conversation where they seemed genuinely concerned. You notice someone becoming distant whenever you succeed, but you tell yourself they're probably just busy, and suddenly you're defending a pattern instead of observing it. Stop doing that. You don't need to become suspicious of everyone. You don't need to assume every mistake has a secret meaning. That's not awareness. That's paranoia. Real awareness is calmer. It doesn't jump to conclusions. It watches. It gives people room to explain themselves while still paying attention to what repeatedly happens afterward, because words can be spontaneous. Actions can be repeated. Someone can tell you they respect you while constantly ignoring your boundaries. Someone can say they support you while subtly discouraging every opportunity you receive. Someone can tell you they care while only appearing when you are useful to them. You don't need to argue with their words. Just watch the pattern. There is something almost unsettling about how much people reveal when you stop interrupting the evidence with excuses. You begin noticing timing. You notice who appears when you are successful and who disappears when you need support. You notice who respects your no and who suddenly becomes emotional when you stop saying yes. You notice who celebrates your progress and who immediately tries to remind you of the person you used to be. These details matter, not because every behavior is a psychological confession, but because repeated behavior gives you information, and information gives you choices. You don't have to confront every pattern you notice. Sometimes the smartest response is simply adjusting your access. Less explanation, less emotional investment, less expectation. You don't have to announce that you've figured someone out. You don't need a dramatic speech. You just move differently. That's the part people often don't understand. They expect awareness to look like confrontation. They expect you to expose them, accuse them, demand answers, and make sure everyone knows what happened. But sometimes awareness looks like silence. You saw it, you understood it, you accepted it, and you stopped participating in it. That is what happens when you stop taking every event personally and start studying behavior objectively. You stop asking whether someone is trying to hurt you and start asking what their repeated choices tell you about where they stand. Because not every negative action requires revenge. Some require distance. Some require boundaries. Some require acceptance. And some require nothing more than remembering what happened the last time you ignored the pattern. There is a strange kind of clarity that appears when you stop reacting. Not because the world suddenly becomes different, but because you finally stop covering the evidence with your emotions. When someone says something disrespectful, your first instinct might be to answer. When someone suddenly becomes distant, you want to ask why. When somebody provokes you, every part of you wants to prove that they cannot treat you that way. And that's exactly when you give away your position. Reaction creates noise. Silence creates space. And inside that space, you begin noticing things you couldn't see before. You start watching how people behave when you don't immediately give them the response they're looking for. You notice who keeps pushing when you don't react. You notice who suddenly becomes uncomfortable when you remain calm. You notice who changes their behavior because they were expecting an emotional reaction from you. That tells you something. Not everything, but something. The person who truly respects you doesn't need your anger to understand your boundary. The person who only understands you when you become aggressive isn't necessarily respecting you. They may simply be responding to pressure. So you stop explaining. You stop defending every little detail. You stop trying to control how everyone interprets you. And suddenly, conversations become different. You hear more. You observe more. You notice pauses, contradictions, changes in tone, repeated behaviors, and the difference between what someone says and what they consistently do. Before, you were preparing your response while they were speaking. Now you're actually listening. That's a dangerous level of awareness, because people reveal themselves when they believe you're distracted by your own emotions. Someone might say, "I was only joking," after making the same insulting comment 3 times. Someone might say, "I didn't mean anything by it," after repeatedly crossing the same boundary. Someone might tell you, "You're overthinking," whenever you point out a behavior they don't want to discuss. And instead of immediately fighting for your interpretation, you pause. You don't need to win the conversation. You need to understand the situation. That difference changes everything. Because when you're desperate to be understood, you'll often explain yourself too much. You'll keep talking, keep probing, keep defending, and eventually give people more information than they ever needed. But when you become comfortable with silence, you discover that not every accusation deserves a defense. Not every misunderstanding deserves correction. Not every insult deserves a response. Sometimes the strongest thing you can say is nothing, not because you're afraid, because you are observing. There is a difference between silent weakness and intentional silence. Weakness stays quiet because it feels powerless. Intentional silence stays quiet because it doesn't need to react to every invitation. You don't have to attend every emotional battle someone tries to start. You don't have to chase someone who suddenly withdraws. You don't have to convince someone who has already decided to misunderstand you. You can let the moment breathe. And when you let it breathe, the truth often becomes easier to recognize. People show you more when you're not fighting them. They reveal their priorities when you stop demanding explanations. They reveal their intentions through consistency. They reveal their emotional maturity through how they respond to your boundaries. They reveal what they expect from you when you stop giving them the reaction they were accustomed to receiving. And the beautiful part is that you don't have to manipulate anyone to discover this. You simply stop interfering. Stop filling every silence. Stop rescuing every uncomfortable conversation. Stop explaining every decision. Stop turning every shift in someone's mood into a personal emergency. Let people behave. Let them speak. Let them make their choices. Then watch what happens. Because sometimes you don't need more information. You need less interference from your own emotional reaction. Your emotions are powerful, but they are not always accurate. That's the part nobody likes to admit. You can feel rejected without actually being rejected. You can feel disrespected without someone intentionally disrespecting you. You can feel ignored when the other person is simply distracted, and you can feel threatened by something that has nothing to do with you. The feeling is real, but the interpretation can be wrong. And if you don't understand that difference, your emotions can turn ordinary situations into personal wars. Your mind doesn't like uncertainty. When something doesn't make sense, It wants an answer immediately. So it starts connecting dots. A short reply becomes anger. A delayed message becomes rejection. A change in someone's expression becomes proof that they are judging you. Suddenly, you're no longer responding to what happened. You're responding to what you believe happened. That's where things become dangerous. Because once you believe your interpretation is reality, you start collecting evidence to support it. They didn't say hello. See, they don't respect me. They didn't invite me. See, they don't want me there. They disagreed with me. See, they're trying to undermine me. And now your mind has created a story. The problem is that stories can feel incredibly convincing when your emotions are involved. Fear searches for danger. Insecurity searches for rejection. Anger searches for disrespect. Jealousy searches for competition. And hurt searches for proof that you were betrayed. The emotion chooses what it wants to notice. That's why emotional awareness isn't about becoming emotionless. It's about learning to pause between feeling something and believing the story attached to that feeling. You can feel angry and still wait before responding. You can feel hurt and still ask whether you understood the situation correctly. You can feel insecure and still refuse to make a decision from that insecurity. You can feel rejected and still remember that someone else's decision doesn't automatically define your value. That pause is where your control begins. Because the person who reacts to every emotion becomes predictable. If someone knows exactly what will make you angry, they can influence your attention. If they know exactly what will make you defensive, they can pull you into endless arguments. If they know exactly what will make you seek reassurance, they can keep you emotionally dependent on their approval. But when you learn to observe your emotions instead of obeying them, something changes. You start asking better questions. What actually happened? What am I assuming? What evidence do I have? Is there another explanation? Have I seen this pattern repeatedly? Or am I reacting to one isolated moment? Those questions don't make you weak. They make you difficult to manipulate by your own imagination. And sometimes the answer will still be uncomfortable. Maybe someone really did disrespect you. Maybe they really are pulling away. Maybe they really don't value the relationship the way you do. But now you're seeing it through clarity instead of panic. That's a completely different position. You don't need to deny what hurts. You need to stop exaggerating what hurts. There is a difference between recognizing reality and feeding a story. Reality says, they didn't respond. The story says, they hate me. Reality says, they criticized my decision. The story says, everyone thinks I'm a failure. Reality says, they chose someone else. The story says, I'm not good enough. And notice how quickly the mind adds meaning. That's where you have to become careful, because the first emotion is automatic. The second thought is where you begin making choices. You don't control every feeling that enters your mind, but you can decide whether that feeling gets to become your identity, your reaction, and your entire reality. People can explain almost anything. They can explain why they disappeared, why they broke a promise, why they treated you differently, why they couldn't show up, why they said something cruel, why they suddenly changed their attitude. And sometimes their explanation is completely honest. But here's the problem. An explanation is only a story about behavior. An action is the behavior itself. That's why you have to stop spending so much time chasing explanations and start paying attention to what people repeatedly do. Someone can tell you they respect you while constantly crossing your boundaries. Someone can tell you they care while only appearing when they need something. Someone can tell you they support you while subtly discouraging every opportunity that makes you stronger. Someone can promise they'll change while repeating the exact same behavior a week later. At some point, you don't need another explanation. You need observation, because words are easy when there are no consequences attached to them. Anyone can say, "I'm sorry." Anyone can say, "I didn't mean it." Anyone can say, "I'll do better." Anyone can promise tomorrow will be different, but watch what happens after the conversation ends. That's where the real information begins. Do they actually change? Do they respect the boundary? Do they follow through? Do they become more consistent? Or do they simply become better at explaining why nothing changed? You don't need to become cynical to understand this. You don't have to assume everyone is lying. You simply stop allowing words to erase patterns. That's a major difference. You can accept someone's apology and still pay attention to their behavior. You can forgive someone and still decide they don't deserve the same level of access to you. You can believe someone means well and still recognize that their actions are hurting you. Because intention and impact are not always the same thing. Someone may not intend to disrespect you, but if they repeatedly ignore your boundaries, the effect is still real. Someone may genuinely care about you, but if they constantly disappear when you need them, their behavior still gives you useful information. This is where emotional maturity becomes uncomfortable. You may have to stop listening to what you desperately want to hear and start accepting what you repeatedly see. And sometimes what you see doesn't match what you hoped for. That's when people usually begin bargaining. Maybe next time. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe they didn't understand. Maybe if I explain myself differently. Maybe if I become more patient. Maybe if I give them another chance. Maybe if I prove that I'm worth treating differently. And suddenly, you're working harder to change someone's behavior than they are. Stop. You are not responsible for convincing someone to treat you properly. You can communicate clearly. You can establish boundaries. You can give reasonable chances. But after that, their choices belong to them. Your responsibility is to decide what their choices mean for your participation. That's the part people misunderstand about boundaries. A boundary isn't a threat. It's information. It tells you what you will do when a certain behavior continues. You don't need to say, "If you do this again, I'll destroy everything." You can simply step back, less access, less explanation, less emotional investment, not as punishment, as protection of your peace. And when you start operating this way, you become much harder to confuse, because you aren't hanging your emotional stability on someone's promises. You're watching consistency. You're watching effort. You're watching whether their actions match their words. And consistency is difficult to fake forever. Eventually, behavior tells the story. Not the dramatic speech, not the perfect apology, not the emotional promise made in the middle of an argument. The repeated choices, those little decisions people make when nobody is forcing them, who they respect, what they prioritize, what they repeat. what they tolerate, what they change, what they refuse to change. You don't have to interrogate anyone. You don't have to expose anyone. You don't have to prove that you were right. Just watch. Because sometimes the clearest answer isn't hidden inside someone's explanation. It's sitting right in front of you, in everything they keep doing. There is a difference between becoming emotionally detached and becoming emotionally dead. You don't need to stop caring about people. You don't need to become cold, distant, suspicious, or impossible to reach just because you've been hurt before. The goal was never to feel nothing. The goal is to stop allowing everything to control what you feel. Because there is a kind of freedom that appears when you realize you can care about someone without carrying their behavior on your back. You can love someone and still have boundaries. You can forgive someone without giving them unlimited access to you. You can understand someone's pain without allowing their pain to become your responsibility. You can wish someone well and still walk away from the chaos they repeatedly create. That's not cruelty. That's emotional discipline. For too long, people confuse kindness with unlimited availability. They think being a good person means explaining yourself endlessly, tolerating everything, rescuing everyone, and staying in situations that slowly destroy your peace. No. You can be compassionate without becoming controllable. You can be understanding without becoming a target. You can listen without absorbing every emotion in the room. And you can care without chasing. That last one is important, because when you stop taking everything personally, you also stop chasing every change in someone's behavior. If they become distant, you don't immediately panic. If they stop responding, you don't start questioning your entire worth. If they criticize you, you don't immediately attack back. If they misunderstand you, you don't spend hours trying to force them to see you differently. You observe. You communicate when necessary. Then you allow people to make their choices. That doesn't mean you don't care. It means you finally understand that control was never the same thing as connection. You cannot control how someone thinks about you. You cannot control whether someone appreciates you. You cannot control whether someone chooses to stay. You cannot control whether someone understands your intentions. And trying to control those things will exhaust you. So you release them. Not because they don't matter, because your peace matters too. There is something powerful about being able to say, I understand why you feel that way, but I don't have to become that way. Someone can be angry without making you angry. Someone can be disrespectful without making you disrespectful. Someone can misunderstand you without forcing you into an endless explanation. Someone can leave without convincing you that you are unworthy of being loved. That's emotional freedom. You stop letting someone else's internal world become your external reality. And this is where detachment becomes useful. You start separating what belongs to you from what belongs to them. Their insecurity belongs to them. Their assumptions belong to them. Their mood belongs to them. Their decisions belong to them. Your responsibility is your response, your standards, your boundaries, your behavior, your direction. And once you understand that, you stop fighting battles that were never yours. You don't need to punish people for disappointing you. You don't need to become bitter because someone showed you a side of themselves you didn't expect. You don't need to turn every betrayal into a permanent personality change. Learn, adjust, move differently. That's enough. Because becoming cold after being hurt is still allowing the hurt to control you. Real strength looks different. You remain kind, but you're no longer naive. You remain open, but you're no longer desperate for approval. You remain compassionate, but you're no longer sacrificing yourself to keep everyone comfortable. You still care. You just stop abandoning yourself in the process. And that's when relationships become clearer. You stop asking, how do I make them treat me differently? You start asking, what do I do with what they've shown me? That question puts your power back where it belongs, with you. You don't have to become heartless to become strong. You don't have to destroy your sensitivity. You simply learn where to place it. You learn when to speak, when to stay silent, when to forgive, when to step back, when to give another chance, and when to accept that distance is sometimes the healthiest form of communication